What's up, my people? This is Can't Fit with the Honda Fit. Today we're going to be talking about wiring in my standalone ECU. It came with a lot of headaches, came with a lot of time spent. It came with a lot of questions being asked and answered, and a lot of time researching and a lot of help from other people. So we're going to be talking about that, all the things I needed, what I expected, the problems I ran into, and how I fixed those problems. All right, y'all, let's get into it. Before I decided to buy the ECU, I did a whole lot of research on the things that I needed. I had to ask a bunch of questions, join a bunch of Facebook groups, but we made it. So the things I needed was, for one, an AllData membership for my to get the wiring diagrams of my car. It's only about $19.99 for the month. So if you're planning to do it, make sure you do it within that month or screenshot the wiring diagrams that you will need for your vehicle. Or you're going to be spending another $20 for the next month. So I needed that. And then I needed obviously a standalone ECU. But you have to remember, it's not just the ECU. You gotta find one that is drive-by-wire compatible if you have a drive-by-wire system, and you have to make sure that you're prepared to spend the extra for the direct injection module if you're not converting over to port injection. You also need to take in consideration the O2 sensor that you're going to be using. Most likely you will have to get a wideband sensor to replace your OEM sensor, and that obviously also costs money. And depending on how that sensor is wired in, whether it be plug and play or you have to wire it in, you have to get some information on that as well. So I needed that, and then I needed connectors, I needed a crimper, I needed tape, sheathing, obviously diagrams, and the knowledge on reading those diagrams. Most importantly, through this whole project, what I realized that I needed the most was time. So if you don't have the time to have your car sitting for a week or 2 weeks, or it's unpredictable if it's going to run while it's in the running state, I would suggest you make sure you have another vehicle just in case, and put aside maybe 2 weeks of complete involvement into your project to get this done. Starting out with the ECU and the O2 sensor, I reached out to a vendor. He asked me all the questions he needed answered, and then priced me for the unit. It seems like drive-by-wire systems are a lot more expensive than drive-by-cable systems. So if you want to convert to drive-by-cable before using or buying your ECU, then please consider that, because it is possible, especially actually with our GK5 model, it is possible to convert to drive-by-cable. It's just modifications necessary. One thing I forgot to mention is the wires. You need wires. So either you buy the flying leads from the ECU company, you buy a plug and play kit from the ECU company, or you only buy the connectors and you wire in the pins and all of that. I suggest just buying the looms and going that route, the flying lead looms instead, because you have to buy more tools for the pin connection thing. So once I got the ECU, I went on Amazon and got the crimping tool. I got the connectors, heat shrink, and some sheathing. So the crimping tool I'll put in here some shots of all the tools that I used. The connector, I decided to go with this all-in-one, I guess you could call it, all-in-one connector that I saw advertised some years ago. It was, or it's on the screen obviously, but it's a connector that solders as well as sheaths that area that of exposed wire. So I decided to go with that because it was a lot easier to use, and I didn't want to spend more and more money, to be honest. So once you've gathered all your necessary tools and equipment, I would also suggest going onto Facebook and looking up help groups for the ECU that you decided to use. Since I went with Link, I joined a Link wiring and ECU Facebook group that I could post questions and people will give me answers to. I also went ahead and joined a group in my area that had tuners, and so I would post my questions to tuners as well. Don't expect the tuners to either get back to you or to even give you any information, because that's basically taking money out of their pocket. So if they do decide to help you, it's out of the kindness of their heart. Okay, so what I expected out of this whole project, one, I didn't expect to jump right into wiring the ECU. However, I did, and so I had to just take it head on. So what I expected was that it was going to be very confusing. And I say that because I didn't really understand how to read wiring diagrams, especially the symbols. I didn't understand the flow of electricity and the flow of data between the unit and the ECU. And so I was going to be doing a whole lot of learning. So I expected to do a whole lot of research, late nights, I expected to be asking a ton of people questions, and expected to not really get much answers back. And I had an unrealistic expectation of how long this project was going to take. I expected the project to take 3 days, about maybe 5 days max. And it ended up taking closer to 2 weeks. And I'm also still working on the project. It's just that the car is now running and I can slowly work on all the other aspects of the wiring. My favorite part that we're going to get into is the problems. The problems that I ran into and how I was able to find the solutions to those problems. So I, for one, will post diagrams that I've used here, and also there's a link below with a Google Drive file of all the diagrams that I could find for, or that I could save from AllData for the GK5 model or year or generation, chassis, whatever. And so anyway, the problems that we were gonna run into was dealing with Canvas. That was gonna be a headache all in itself because I didn't have a sniffer, a Canvas sniffer. And I still don't understand even 1% of the Canvas system. So the other problem that I was going to run into was the drive-by-wire. This was going to be an issue because the drive-by-wire system has technically a fail-safe system, and so they have redundancies on power. And so that confused me to a point where I was stuck. I had to ask for help with that from my father, who is a retired master certified technician, and from some other people that I am now friends with. So for the Canvas, I decided I'm just gonna not even use it, right? The drive-by-wire system, I spent a couple hours on the phone with my father and spent a lot of time with Eduardo from Turktuned. Uh, you'll see his link in the description below as well. Spent a lot of time talking to them on how and why the system was wired the way it was wired. And so we went through it and figured out that one, that obviously there's a redundancy, and as long as we are able to wire them correctly as far as polarity and all of that goes, then we should be fine. So I will also show a drawing or diagram on the screen here for that. Luckily, drive-by-wire wasn't as complicated as I thought it was going to be, so it was an easy fix, especially with Eduardo guiding me. It was a great experience, and like I said, easy fix for the drive-by-wire. Now, originally I had planned to keep the dash display, and I had planned to do that because I didn't want to buy a new dash display, and I didn't want to have a bunch of lights and blinking nonsense on my dash as I'm driving. I wanted to keep the tach. I wanted to keep the, or not the tach, the miles per hour. I wanted to keep all of that stuff. However, my impatience and lack of planning brought me to basically cutting the canvas wires to the dash and some information also needed for the dash, which I could wire in later. I can probably still wire it in now, but as we speak right now, the dash is completely useless, basically. So for future reference, if you're going to keep your dash, then what you would need to do is just tee in to the wires that you need instead of cutting them. And that's from the harness coming from the firewall into the ECU. You should see which connector that is here on the screen. But yes. So because I wasn't patient enough to keep the wires and figure out how to tee into the system, I ended up losing my dash. Oh well, it's fine. I'm gonna figure out a dash system at some point. Right now what I'm using is my Draggy and the Draggy app to tell my speed, and I'm using the tuning software to show RPMs, if not just listening to the vehicle. The next problem I ran into was the fan, the radiator fan. I didn't realize that the cooling system had a totally separate diagram in ALLDATA than the engine control diagram. So I ended up having to spend another $20 for another month just for the, I guess, ancillary diagrams that I would need for the wiring of the whole system. So with the fan, it's kind of weird because it has a continuous 12 volt, but it also has, I don't honestly know how to explain it. So what I ended up doing, Eduardo actually guided me to do this. What I ended up doing was using one fan. Since as you know, I have taken one fan out and I've changed out my radiator and everything. If you keep both fans, then you shouldn't need to worry about this. But what I ended up doing was making a jumper for the second connection, the second fan, so that the first fan can activate when necessary. I don't know why it worked that way, but it worked that way. So that's what we did. And here's some pictures of that. The VTEC system ended up being the most complicated and most headache inducing system that I was wiring. And that's because the diagrams show that these systems, some or most of these systems are grounded, and it just says grounded. It doesn't say chassis ground. It doesn't say um, grounded through the ECU. Oh, pro tip that I learned from Eduardo at TurkTuned, that the ECU is usually the grounded side of things. The um, each unit and each system has their power ran to them. However, the ECU grounds them and ends up causing them to actually get the power or use the power that they are receiving. For example, the injectors have two wires, positive and negative. And the positive wire is actually ran to an ignition power wire. So when you turn your ignition on, the power runs to the injectors. Now, the ground wire for the injectors are actually sent to the ECU, and the ECU, these are the wires that you would separate for one. These are the wires that you would separate for each injection, each cylinder. And the ECU then grounds each one in the firing order. Now, the power is still there, and the power is continuously there because the ignition is on. Now, the ECU is telling each injector, okay, now you're grounded, now you're grounded, now you're obviously, and that causes them to actually fire or to actually pulse. So with each system, I had to keep that in mind. And at times I was running into issues because I would forget that the ECU is ground, technically. So for a lot of sensors, you would have a sensor ground led from the ECU, and it would need to be connected to those sensor grounds, the grounds on the sensor, so that the ECU can get feedback on what the sensor is actually trying to tell it. So for the VTEC system, I ran into the issue where I kept switching, or I was wiring the wrong polarity to what I was wiring. At one point I was wiring the ground to chassis ground and had the power wires to the aux outputs on the ECU. Now, what I learned was, and what I learned by continuous failure, is that the power wire was supposed to be to ignition power, which is the 12-volt continuous power. Now, the ground wire was supposed to be to the auxiliary output wires because the ECU controls the grounded side of things. So for me to be able to activate the ground, or to activate VTEC, I would have to lead the ground wire as the control wire to the ECU. After figuring this out, then all it came down to was understanding how to program it and how to set things up in the Link system or the Link program itself. And if you want me to get into the Link program and how it works with the GK5 chassis, I can do that. It would have to probably be in a separate video because there is a plethora of things that I would have to go over. I can go over some things now. However, I don't know if you guys want to sit through this long of the video. If at all possible, if you guys can leave a like or a comment below on this video. This is probably the video that has taken the most time from me as far as like planning and kind of bulleting on what I need to talk about. If there's anything that I missed that you have questions about, please ask it below. I will try and put in all the wiring diagrams that I used or needed during this process. And yeah, if you like, subscribe, and let me know how I'm doing. All right, y'all, this is Can't Fit with the Honda Fit, and I'll see y'all in the next one.